relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Hello and welcome back to GSMC's Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We are in the home stretch of the show, my final two segments, and they should be very exciting ones. We are going to shift from college football to the NFL, where I will be looking at ESPN's Tight End Fantasy Rankings. We are in the home stretch of those rankings as well. We have done the quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. This is probably the last position group that I will get to. And in terms of these tight ends, this is a very exciting list, obviously. Tight ends, probably not the most coveted position in terms of fantasy, but still respectable. I have the list right here. And without further ado, let's get right into it. At number one, a little bit of a shock, but not in my opinion, because as a rookie last year, he had big numbers in a Detroit Lions offense that was very successful, and yes, that is Sam Laporta, who I'm talking about. Obviously, this, as well as Amon-Ra St. Brown's tight end rankings in the wide receiver rankings, is probably credited to Jared Goff's contract extension, but also just because of the monster athlete Sam Laporta is. I think that the Detroit Lions offense, especially going into next year, is going to be very varied. They retain Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator, who is going to want to get as many players, as many touches as possible. So look for the Lions skill position players to benefit from that. I think that Sam Laporta, especially coming into his second year in the league, is going to be one of the premier tight ends in the league, obviously challenging the next guy on this list for the tight end one position at the end of the year. And I think that while a lot of people think that the next guy on this list is still the number one tight end in the league, I say that Sam Laporta is going to be the one to take over that come this next guy's retirement. And yes, that next guy, who I've been alluding to for quite some time, is Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is still going to be one of the top tight ends in the league, no matter how long he plays. I think that ultimately this year, well, with the addition of a player to the draft and Xavier Worley for the Kansas City Chiefs, who we will discuss in my next segment, I think that Travis Kelce's numbers could go down, but he is still Mahomes' number one option. Obviously, you have a guy like Rashee Rice who's going to be relied upon this year, but outside of that, I think that the Chiefs were still going to try and solve their wide receiver issue. I think that Xavier Worthy's not just going to be a plug-and-play sort of player. He's going to want to be implemented more into Andy Reid's offense. So I think that ultimately, Kelce is going to have his targets elevated at the start of this year. However, by the end of this year, I don't expect him to get as many targets, as I feel that Andy Reid is going to have integrated players like Worthy, Rice, MVS more into his system, get them more comfortable and acclimated to his style of play, and I think that Kelce's numbers will decline. That being said, I don't think they will decline as much as people expect. He is still Travis Kelce, and he still has Patrick Mahomes as his QB, and they are still one of the best wide QB tight end duos in the league. So I think that Travis Kelce, for the time being, has to remain in at least the top two. Going on to number 3 here is another player who is coming off a sad injury last year in the AFC Championship game. Who knows if he would have been able to help Lamar and the Ravens win in that AFC Championship game had he been healthy. Yes, I'm talking about Mark Andrews, one of the preeminent tight ends in this league for the past couple of years, mainly because of the Ravens' style of play, I suspect. I think that he is the number one target because of the fact that Lamar Jackson has not only himself as a rushing tool, but also a nice crop of running backs that has added Derrick Henry to it. So I think that Mark Andrews as a tight end benefits a lot from any times the Ravens pass because of his ability to play in the seam, in the slot. He's just a very versatile tight end who definitely deserves to be in the conversation for a top 3 tight end in the league. I do think he does sit behind Travis Kelce, also Laporta as well after his breakout rookie year, but obviously Mark Andrews, when healthy, is such a weapon for Lamar Jackson. That offense could be seen as not only the number one tight end in that offense, but as a receiver option, he is just that good and versatile for this team. And I think that ultimately, Mark Andrews deserves to be a top 5 tight end in terms of fantasy. He's going to put up some big numbers this year for Lamar and the Ravens. Going in at number 4, kind of a surprise in my opinion, perhaps due to the fact that he gets a full season under Kyler Murray, but I'm not necessarily certain I would put him as high. It is Trey McBride. Last year, probably one of the better Cardinals weapons, seeing as to how they were heavily decimated by the injury to Kyler Murray to start the season, so their passing attack was not as potent as it should have been. But I can see how Trey McBride's status gets elevated due to the fact that Kyler Murray comes back. But however, I think that the Cardinals are going to want to get another rookie going, who I'm going to talk about later, for in this offense. So Trey McBride in the top 4 is kind of our first surprise here. That being said, I do think that the Cardinals will want to get their passing attack going, and he could benefit from that. But that is really all about all the stuff I want to say about him, rather, that should be of note. Coming in at number 5 is Evan Engram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. What a shocking turnaround for his career, moving from the Giants, where he did not have as much success, and now with Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Evan Engram having a huge success at the tight end position. However, I do think that his success stems from whether or not Trevor Lawrence can get going. I think that Trevor Lawrence is very volatile. I think this past year he definitely regressed to the mean a little bit. I do think that Evan Engram's play heavily relies upon how Trevor Lawrence plays, whether or not, he wants Evan Engram to be a huge part of this offense. I think he will be, because they lost Calvin Ridley. I think that Evan Engram now becomes one of the more potent targets in this team. However, I do think that Doug Peterson has wanted to rely on the run a little bit. So look for Evan Engram to be more seen in the screen action game a little bit. I think that it heavily depends upon whether or not Doug Peterson relies on Trevor Lawrence to be able to scheme around a player like Evan Engram. So I think that he is deserving of this spot, but we'll see as the season goes on whether or not Trevor Lawrence can keep him there. At the number 6 position is a tight end who can at any given time be in the conversation for any of the positions above him. That is George Kittle. Obviously, he is seen as a huge weapon for this 49ers offense. I think that George Kittle is going to be one of the top tight ends you talk about come the end of the year. I just think that he's one of those players who does not benefit from how good of skill position players are around him. I think that Brock Purdy wants to distribute the ball a lot, and that is why that number at number 6 is reflected with George Kittle. I think that he's still one of the preeminent tight ends in the league. He's still going to get major yard production. However, I do see what with the rise of some younger players, how George Kittle can be viewed as outside the top 5. I think that he's still a stellar athlete, though, and we shouldn't count him out. Coming in at number 7, probably one of the more underrated tight ends on this list, in my opinion, mainly due to the fact that we don't know how he'll perform with his quarterback, Deshaun Watson, David Njoku. I think that David Njoku is a stellar athlete, but most of that stemmed from the fact that last year, once Deshaun Watson went down, he had inflated numbers due to the fact that Joe Flacco had him as his favorite target, and I think that Deshaun Watson coming back might limit his number of targets going forward, because Deshaun Watson is not necessarily that as reliant on tight ends as, say, Joe Flacco was. So I think that David Njoku, while deserving to be in these top 10 rankings, might have his numbers deflated due to the fact that Deshaun Watson is going to be looking more to players such as Elijah Mitchell, who was one of his more reliable targets, and Amari Cooper. That being said, I think that David Njoku could turn out to be a steal if Deshaun Watson incorporates him more into the offense, if Kevin Stefanski as well incorporates him more into their offense, because of the fact that David Njoku is such a stellar athlete. Very versatile in terms of his route running abilities, one of the best route running tight ends in the league in my opinion, and so I think he's well deserved to be on this list. Coming in at number 8, a very interesting player, another second-year player for Buffalo, Dalton Kincaid. I think that this number is elevated mainly due to the fact that he is now one of Josh Allen's premier targets. Obviously, they lost Gabe Davis, they lost Stephon Diggs. So who is going to be that number 1 target for the Buffalo Bills? I think the answer is going to be Dalton Kincaid, and that is reflected in why he's so high in these rankings. I think that Josh Allen's going to have to look for him early and often. I don't think he's as versatile as a route runner as some of the ones above him, but he is still a very nice piece. Obviously, coming out of Utah last year, one of the best tight ends in college football history, in my opinion. So I think that the pressure's going to be on him to be the guy for Josh Allen, but I think that he will handle that pressure well because of the fact that he is going to get a lot of targets in this offensive system, obviously, as they transition to more rushing style attack, as we saw last year. I think that Dalton Kincaid will get a number of short yardage opportunities, and thus I think that he is well deserving of a top 10 spot. At number 9, I think this is a guy who can be higher come the end of the year due to the fact that he now has better quarterback play, and that is Kyle Pitts. I think that Kyle Pitts has been heavily underrated due to the fact that his QBs over the past couple of years were dreadful. Now he gets an experienced QB in Kirk Cousins, who I think will utilize him very well. He gets a new head coach in Raheem Morris, who, while more defensive-minded, is more willing to utilize his offensive weapons and be able to get Kyle Pitts a number of targets in the future. So look for Kyle Pitts to be a player who rises in these fantasy rankings come the end of the year because of the fact that his quarterback is much better than he had in the past. And rounding out ESPN's Tight End Rankings, another player who kind of rose through the ranks sneakily last year, and his numbers are reflected this year, is Jake Ferguson. I think that Jake Ferguson definitely deserves to be in the top 10 just for his breakout campaign last year. I think that ultimately, with a number of Cowboys who are ranked very highly in ESPN's rankings at other position groups, I think that reflects on Jake Ferguson, as he will not be ranked as highly, but he's still a sneaky good weapon for the Dallas Cowboys going forward. Dak Prescott loved him a lot in the red zone last year, so look for Jake Ferguson to have a big year again in terms of touchdowns, in terms of production in the red zone. I think that he could be a very nice steal for anyone drafting later in fantasy. But that'll just about do it for this segment of the show. Coming up on my last segment of the show, we transition from tight ends to this exciting group of rookies coming into the league this year. We will be right back for what should be a very exciting segment.